Hello folks, and welcome back to GameSpot's continuing coverage of E3 2014. You're watching the Samsung stage right here on GameSpot.com. I'm your host, Daniel Dwyer, for the next couple of demos, and I'm very happy to be joined by Michael DePlatter. Sir, Monolith, you guys are working on this crazy Middle-earth game that people are pretty excited about.
Oh yeah, E3's been amazing, actually getting their hands on it, getting all of the feedback. It's been phenomenal, really great.
So for anyone who hasn't seen it, Shadow of Mordor, explain what exactly it is, because I think it's actually quite surprising what type of game it is.
It's a third-person, open-world action-adventure game, and it takes place after the end of The Hobbit, so Sauron's been defeated by the White Council, driven out of Dol Guldur. It's after the end of the Battle of Five Armies.
Spoilers!
Sorry, if you don't read, that's a spoiler. But it's still 6 decades before the War of the Ring. So cool. Sauron's just returned home to Mordor, and his return kind of obviously is a pretty dramatic event in Mordor. And for the past 2 millennia while he's been away, the Rangers of Gondor have been guarding it, and when he returned, they're all slaughtered, including the character you play, Talion. But then you're resurrected by a spirit of vengeance that's also awakened by Sauron's return and has a very sort of deep, ancient grudge against Sauron. And
yes.
Together the two of you kind of head behind enemy lines to take on the Dark Lord's forces.
And that's what we saw in some of the CG trailer that you released as well. We're looking at a trailer right here, actually. So tell us a little bit the main character. He's kind of like half wraith, half warrior.
Yeah, so he really is the embodiment of these two characters, of this. I nearly slipped and gave a spoiler then. That was close. So the Wraith himself is this very powerful character from the lore, strong connection with Sauron, strong connection with the rings of power and all those sort of ideas of power and what that means. Whereas Talion is someone who effectively has been cursed by being bound to this Wraith. So He begins the game very much in the same situation as the player. He's unsure of why it is. He doesn't understand why he's not dead, why he hasn't been allowed to find peace in death. And in order to discover that, uncover it, and also pursue the guys responsible for his death and the death of his family, he has to travel together with this Wraith and kind of unravel that mystery.
So let's talk about the bones of the game, the actual moment-to-moment play. I guess Lord of the Rings games, there's been a couple of them. They've been predominantly tied to the series itself of movies. They've been character action games where you were essentially following the plot, linear plot of the movies. This is a much more open experience. Can you explain just how open it is right from the get-go when you start playing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the two parts to that. One, we absolutely didn't want to be a movie game.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's definitely something with Warner Brothers, with our brief right from the beginning of you've got this benchmark of the right way to treat a license is to do the best possible game you can do and not to do a movie
Certainly
game.
Been the case with the Batman stuff as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, they're a big inspiration and they really just set this incredibly high bar to aim towards. But, and then with The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings themselves, with those stories, they're these amazing standalone stories that you can enjoy on their own or as part of the kind of greater history of Middle-earth. And so we really wanted to do that as well, to have a standalone story that can be enjoyed, whether it's your first entry into Middle-earth or whether you are incredibly hardcore into every detail of the lore and history, making it accessible from all of those different directions. And of course, in the same way, the books are these incredible stories, but within a universe like that, what's exciting is the possibility of getting to actually explore it, getting to create your own stories, and that's what games as a medium can bring that no other medium can. That's the one big strength that we have. So it was extremely important to create an open world game, give players the freedom to actually explore, create their own stories.
So is that world, is it completely open from the start? Obviously there is a narrative thread throughout the game. There's a quest to be completed. But can you approach them in an order you perceive to be what you want to do? Or are there side quests? Just what are we talking? Because open world is quite a scalable thing right now.
Yep. So the world is divided into zones. It's not entirely continuous, but within each zone, with each area of the world, you're completely free to go and pursue it in the order that you want. And the two that we've shown Udun, which is Sindarin for hell. That's the opening area of the game when you are resurrected and awaken on the other side of the Black Gates. And then here at E3, we're also revealing the Nirn, which is another region that's many sort of hundreds of miles deeper into Mordor, behind enemy lines, and is a very sort of different area of Mordor, much more lush and so on. But and so then within those, you can pursue different side stories in whatever order you want. You know, one of the things we were very, very excited about was working with Christian Cantamessa. So he's the lead writer, lead designer on Red Dead, and that inspiration of having these amazing characters and side stories that you can meet within the world, and you can go and pursue those. So even, you know, the main story path's not linear. But then our big innovation is we've focused very, very much on our enemies and the stories you can create with your own personal enemies.
Yeah, so I remember, was it earlier this year or perhaps at the tail end of last year, you guys showed off what's I think is it known as the Nemesis system?
Yep.
It's essentially this way of having a degree of history with the enemies in the game.
Yeah, it's a combination. Like, I think our two goals were to, you know, it's an action game. And so much of what defines what you do in an action game is your interaction and combat and contesting against your enemies. And yeah, here they are. So at the bottom end, we didn't want to have generic cannon fodder because there's only so much of that you can do before it gets tired. So we wanted to make every enemy you encounter represent a possibility for all sorts of things that could happen, whether you can interrogate them to get information, bend them to your will, create missions, they can defeat you. You know, so every encounter can have the seeds of all sorts of possibilities and stories. And then at the other end, the bosses, the ultimate bad guys that you're going to have a personal grudge with, we wanted to make that personal. So these guys are going to grow, they're going to remember, they're going to gain their own skills. They're actually living within the sort of the open world, pursuing their own missions. And so as they interact with you as the player, you're building up these stories. But because Mordor is this incredibly dangerous place, and Orc society is so driven by violence and competition.
I love Orc society. That's
great. It's an Orc social simulator. This really is sort of, and it sort of makes the most brutal prison yard you could imagine tame by comparison. Everything's solved by violence. So they're fighting against each other to rise through the ranks. So being able to get into the middle of that and basically, in a way, you are almost, you know, playing this simulator from the inside through your actions, but then having it remember and acknowledge that and speak back to you. And you know, that's what's been so exciting here at E3 is that every single person that plays gets to have a different experience.
And it is interesting. I remember, I think it was maybe the second reveal you showed, or perhaps it was that first one. It's very strong. It was showing the ability to, you know, you can either run in and do your bloodbath thing, or like interacting with one of them and was setting the stage for a mission way further in the future. Like you could influence one of the orcs to the stage where they could almost cheat their way through the final mission later on.
Yes.
How hard is it creating those systems, knowing that you're trying to enable the player to do those things without giving them too much of a foreshadowing of what could happen in the future? Because it must be hard to, you know, the immediacy of just chopping somebody's head off is right there. So how do you encourage the player to try and work at that sort of almost subversive diplomacy within the game?
I think there's a few ways. One is by just supporting a very, very rich and dynamic ecosystem. So you've got monsters turning up. If alarms go off, things can get very crazy very quickly. You've got opportunities in the environment to incinerate these guys or unleash swarms of biting flies, or have, you know, walls collapse on them. So there's a load of different ways they can possibly die. Plus the morale system's very dynamic. These guys have to be smart enough not to just stand there and let you kill them. When things are turning against them in the midst of this chaos, like any good villain, they're going to actively try and live to fight another day. So they really are, you know, like any villain does, trying to engineer a series of encounters with you, trying to jump out and ambush you when you're weakest, trying to follow you, only being drawn out by you within areas where they feel safe. Yeah, so it's not, it's kind of, without geeking out too much, but it's sort of
feel free.
It's an AI dungeon master. It's not like we're trying to create a totally chessboard simulation. We're trying to create a system that actually does build stories, build memorable moments, let you engineer all of this chaos, and then, you know, because another thing that's a big motivation, people love to record and share and talk about the stories of their most memorable and epic moments, whatever the game is. Could be a sports game, strategy game, whatever. But within the game itself, we can use the enemies as the way to acknowledge that, let you know that we've seen this awesome stuff happen, and pay it off, and then give you the satisfaction of doubling down on that by, you know, getting revenge or building a grudge against this guy or bending him to your will. So it's really letting players create their own stories and then wrapping them in the narrative of the world, so it's really immersive.
What I like about it is that even seems, from a personnel standpoint on this project, to be the case. You have priors with Creative Assembly, working on the Rome series. This has been developed by Monolith, who are a team that have made some of the most immersive first-person games. Like I'm a big fan of Condemned, Fear, and like you want to go as far back as Blood, which is a first-person game I mentioned, and people don't even remember what it was. But those really sort of rich environments. You say that the lead writer on Red Dead is involved as well. Is it the fact that you're making a game that is very mechanically clever, but then you're sort of just you're trying to keep those you're layering? It's almost like that marriage of art and technical that's happening.
Exactly. Yes.
Because this game for you and for a lot of those guys, it's a third-person action game, so it's kind of not necessarily in your safe zone either.
No, which is great. I mean, there are no safe zones anymore. You've either got to go for it or give up. But and so I think we're in a situation where we had to kind of by definition try something new and something ambitious, and try. This is very much a Monolith game. Play to the strengths of the team, which is the AI, which is the great writing, which is layering in this storytelling, which is, I think, this combination of there's certainly some darkness, but there's some humor, and bringing that sort of character and atmosphere to it. So, it's been just such a learning process for me to work with these guys and to learn so much from the team as well. And then also, I think, be able to bring some influences from even other genres. So, sports games and strategy games, which are games about making systems to create and tell a story. And when we can put those two things together, to have these systems, but then to have that flavor and that kind of visceral action and that humor and that atmosphere, and hopefully try to kind of bring all that together, that's create something that I think is pretty unique. Awesome.
Michael the Platter, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can you, for the folks at home one more time, could you let them know when it's out and on what platforms?
Absolutely. So Shadow of Mordor is coming out on October the 7th, and it's going to be on PlayStation 4, Xbox One, PC, Xbox 360, and PlayStation 3.
Bam! I got a lot of work to do.
Yes, indeed.
Nice.
Go back and do it. Well, actually, there's a lot of guys there right now doing that work. So.
All right. I hope they're enjoying this stream. I'm taking a little bit of a break off. Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We got a bunch more stuff left up here in the Samsung stage. I know Codename Steam's up and Nos Goth, but we got a CNET check-in. I'm guessing it's Ashley. It might be Jeff Bacalar. We'll find out in just a second.